Elena had always known how to pray. She wasn't a pastor, prophet, or platform speaker. She didn't carry titles, but she knew the presence of God. She had lived it, breathed it, depended on it. Until one day, he went quiet, and that silence nearly destroyed her. When everything began to fall, it started with her job. Out of nowhere, the company downsized. She was called into a cold HR room with beige walls and words like "we're sorry" and "restructure" and "unforeseen circumstances." She nodded politely, smiled through the awkward handshake, and left with her dignity, but not her security. Then came her mother's diagnosis. Cancer, stage 3. Elena moved back home to help, thinking she'd have more time. But the treatments didn't help much. Her mother's body withered quickly, and her faith seemed to disappear even faster. "I don't think God hears me anymore," her mom whispered one night. Elena squeezed her hand and said what she thought she believed. "He does. He's just quiet sometimes." But even she wasn't sure anymore. When heaven went silent after the funeral, Elena couldn't cry, couldn't pray, couldn't sleep. She would lay awake at night and whisper, "God," and the room would feel like concrete. She tried to sing worship songs, but they felt empty. She opened her Bible, and the words blurred. She kneeled beside her bed and felt no one there. Not anger, not punishment, just absence. "Are you still here?" she asked one night. No lightning, no still small voice, just silence. A faith that was once fire. There was a time when Elena had danced in church like David, when she wept during worship and wrote down dreams in journals, when she laid hands on her friends and saw healing and breakthrough. But now, she couldn't even open her mouth to pray. Not because she stopped believing, but because she didn't know how to speak to a God who wouldn't speak back. She still went to church, still served, still smiled. But on the inside, she was unraveling. Isolation in plain sight, no one noticed. Because Elena was strong, because Elena was spiritual, because Elena never complained. But every day, she felt like she was drowning underwater while everyone around her breathed freely. The worst part, she started to believe the lies. "God's mad at you. You disappointed him. You should have prayed harder for your mom. Maybe he's just done with you." And because there was no voice to counter them, they began to feel like truth. Small things began to break. The light bulb in her hallway died, and she didn't replace it. Her dishes piled in the sink, and she walked past them. She used to fill her walls with scripture art and sticky notes of prophetic promises. Now the walls were bare. She didn't even notice when the calendar turned into a new year. Elena was alive, but hollow. When God felt like a stranger, she sat in her car one rainy afternoon, watching people walk by, laughing and drinking coffee. She whispered through clenched teeth, "Where are you? You said you'd never leave me, but you feel gone." And just like always, nothing. No words, no reassurance, just raindrops and silence. The secret cry that night, Elena finally broke. She collapsed to her knees in the shower, hot water mixing with tears. "I don't even want anything big, God," she cried. "I just want to know you're still here. I just want to know I matter. I just want to hear you say something." Her voice cracked on that last word, but again, no reply. And so, for the first time in her life, she said something she never thought she'd say. "Maybe I imagined all of it." But heaven was not empty. What Elena didn't know was that her silence wasn't ignored. It was being fought for. There was war in the spirit over her soul. Angels guarded her even when she didn't feel them. Demons whispered lies, but they couldn't pass the line of blood still covering her life. And Jesus? He wasn't gone. He was fighting, silently, fiercely, faithfully. And soon, the veil would lift. Soon she would see. But first, he needed her to survive the silence. Elena didn't plan to disappear. She just faded, one unanswered message at a time. One "I'm just tired" excuse at a time. One skipped gathering, one unread devotional, one silent ride home from church. Nobody noticed when she stopped posting her encouraging verses. Nobody asked why her chair at Bible study stayed empty. And honestly, she didn't blame them. She wouldn't have known what to say even if they had asked. The smile that wasn't real, she still smiled at the grocery store, still waved politely when neighbors passed, still said "blessed" and highly favored when asked how she was doing. But inside, Elena was unraveling. Not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly. The return of old fears with every passing day of silence from God, old wounds reopened. She remembered being 8 years old, praying for her father to stop drinking and watching him stumble and drunk again. She remembered being 17, begging God to keep her friend alive after the accident, and attending her funeral the next week. She remembered her mother, frail and fading, asking through tear-glossed eyes, "Why didn't he heal me?" And she remembered having no answer. Now all those moments crowded her heart like shadows in a locked room. Nightmares and numbness, sleep betrayed her. If she managed to rest, her dreams were full of chaos, dark corridors, falling elevators, voices calling her name that never revealed their faces. One night, she dreamt she was drowning. Hands reached for her from above the water, but none grabbed her. She woke up gasping. Her throat was raw from a silent scream. She stared at the ceiling, blinking away the tears, and whispered, "Jesus, do you even see this?" Still nothing. The battle behind the silence, but in the unseen realm. There was movement. Every time Elena cried out, angels took formation. Every time she almost gave up, heaven intervened. She didn't know that the dream of drowning was not her mind. It was a warning. There was a demonic assignment sent to fracture her hope, whisper false narratives, make her forget who she was. But Jesus stood in front of her, unseen but unshaken, sword in hand, eyes blazing, heart locked on her, and he didn't need to speak to prove he was fighting. His silence was strategy. "She still belongs to me. In the heavenlies," demons argued. "She's pulling away. She hasn't prayed in weeks. She doesn't believe anymore. We've got her." But Jesus replied with just 3 words, "She's still mine." And in that moment, heaven roared. Because ownership in the kingdom doesn't expire in silence. A strange encounter one afternoon, Elena went for a walk just to clear her head. She ended up near a park she hadn't visited in years. A little girl was sitting alone on a swing. She looked up at Elena and smiled wide. "Hi," she beamed. "Jesus told me you'd come. Elena Froze. What did you say?" The girl giggled and ran off, her laughter echoing. Elena stood rooted in place. Goosebumps lined her arms. Was that a coincidence? Or something else? She wanted to believe, but her heart whispered, "Don't get your hopes up." She went home and didn't tell a soul. But that smile haunted her in the best way. When darkness tried again that night, the lies returned. "That wasn't Jesus. That was your imagination. You're making this up. Why would he send a message to someone like you?" Elena curled up on her bed, holding her pillow like a shield. "I just want to know you're real," she whispered. "I just want to know you're still near." The hidden strike in the realm of the spirit. Another demon reached toward her mind, trying to bind it in hopelessness. But before it could touch her, a blinding flash of light knocked it back. Jesus stepped forward again, no words, just fire in his eyes. He blocked every hit, shielded every lie, held every thread of her unraveling soul, and whispered, not to Elena, but to the enemy, "You will not take her." What her tears did back in her room, Elena cried herself to sleep again. But every tear she shed wasn't wasted. Each drop watered something sacred. Each ache released something buried. Each silent night brought her closer to the moment heaven would break its quiet. Elena had reached her edge. Not the kind of edge you post about. Not the kind people notice from the outside, but the quiet edge. The one where the soul begins to sink beneath the surface. Where laughter feels foreign. Where faith feels foolish. She had no more strength to fake it. The night it all collapsed, it was past midnight. The city was asleep, but Elena was wide awake, staring blankly at her ceiling. Her thoughts circled the same questions like vultures. What if God really left? What if I miss my moment? What if I never feel him again? She got up, walked to her small kitchen, and opened the drawer. Inside was her journal, once full of scriptures, dreams, and divine moments, now blank for months. She flipped through it, reading old prayers. They felt like echoes from another lifetime. One entry read, "God, I trust you even when I don't understand you." She laughed bitterly. "Did I really write that?" She closed the book slowly, then whispered, "I don't feel anything anymore. Not even anger." And for the first time, she said the unthinkable, "Maybe you really did leave." The cry that changed everything. She fell to the floor. Not dramatically, just a quiet collapse, like a tree that had been cut at the roots long ago and finally gave in to gravity. She pressed her face into the carpet and wept. No words, no structure, just groaning from deep places no one else had seen. "Jesus, if you're still there, I need you now. I don't care if you never fix anything. Just don't let me go." Then silence. She waited. Stillness. She almost got up, convinced he didn't answer. But then something shifted. They encountered the room filled with warmth. Not heat, not emotion. Presence. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then she saw him. Not with her physical eyes, but deep within. Jesus, standing, silent, but fierce. His eyes locked onto hers. Eyes full of fire, sorrow, and love. But he wasn't speaking. He was bleeding. Not from wounds caused by nails, but from fresh strikes. On his chest, his arms, his back. She realized these weren't his wounds. These were hers. She gasped, "Why are you bleeding like that?" And finally, he spoke. Soft, strong, steady. "Because I took your blows. The ones that were meant to destroy you. The ones that came from lies, loss, and silence. I wore them so they wouldn't wear you down." Tears streamed from her eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" His gaze softened. "Because sometimes love doesn't scream. It shields. Sometimes I fight in silence, because my voice might comfort you, but my sword protects you." She fell to her knees again, but this time not from defeat, from reverence. Visions from a war. Then he reached out his hand. When she touched it, flashes of vision poured into her spirit. A night she nearly wrecked her car. An angel had held the wheel. A moment she almost swallowed the lies of suicide, but heaven sent a neighbor's call. A dream that felt like a nightmare, but had actually blocked a demonic entry. Times when she was weeping, while Jesus stood at the foot of her bed, warring silently over her soul. She gasped, shaking from the truth. "You were never gone," he smiled. "No, I was fighting. The breaking that birthed revival." She woke up the next morning different. The room still looked the same. The weather hadn't changed. The circumstances hadn't reversed. But she had. Something inside her had been reignited. Her face was still stained with tears. But they weren't the tears of defeat. They were the tears of deliverance. Back to the journal, she opened her journal again. This time, her hand didn't tremble. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "I thought the silence meant you left, but it only meant you were fighting harder than I could imagine. Thank you for bleeding for me. Thank you for not answering too soon. Thank you for staying." The silence didn't break with thunder. It began with a whisper, and Elena could finally hear it. A still, small voice. It came one morning while making coffee. She wasn't even praying, just quietly humming, the way she used to before everything fell apart. Then a sentence brushed across her heart like wind through curtains. "You're not lost. You're learning to listen." She froze. There was no radio, no one in the apartment. But the sentence remained, echoing gently in her spirit. She smiled for the first time in weeks. "Hi," she whispered upward. And this time she felt heard. The return of wonder. She started noticing the little things. The way the sunrise painted the sky with colors no camera could capture. The unexpected text from a friend she hadn't heard from in months. "I don't know why, but you've been on my heart. Jesus sees you." A song came on in the grocery store, one she used to play during her best years with God. She stopped mid-aisle, listening, letting the lyrics hug the ache in her chest. "He's reminding me," she thought. "He's really reminding me." The word that read her, she opened her Bible again. This time, it wasn't a struggle. It felt like a conversation. Isaiah 43 stared back at her. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned." Tears blurred the page. It wasn't a promise of escape. It was a promise of presence. And presence she realized, was what she had craved more than answers. Prophetic encounters. One Sunday, she visited a new church. She sat in the back, not expecting much. She just wanted to be in the room. During worship, an older woman in front of her turned and gently touched her arm. "I don't know you," she said softly, "but I felt the Lord say, I've been fighting for her. I never left." Elena's hands trembled. She didn't even try to hold back the tears. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't forgotten. God was speaking again, through others, through His Word, and through her own spirit. But most of all, He had never stopped moving. Dreams restored that night. She dreamed again. But it wasn't darkness or drowning. She saw herself as a little girl, dancing barefoot in a field. Jesus stood at a distance, smiling, His arms wide open. The girl ran toward Him, and He lifted her high into the air, spinning her like a father who had missed his daughter for years. When she woke, the joy followed her, and so did the clarity. He's restoring me, not just fixing me, restoring me. Community reopened. Elena rejoined her women's group. She didn't pretend anymore. "I almost quit everything," she said openly. "I thought He left me. I thought I lost my faith. But I didn't. I was being fought for in silence." They listened. Some cried. Others confessed that they too had experienced the quiet, the ache, the waiting. It turned the group into something new. Not just a study, a safe space, where faith wasn't measured by noise, but by who held on in the quiet. A shift in her spirit. She didn't walk perfectly. She still had days when the silence echoed louder than the whispers. But now she knew she wasn't being ignored. She was being led. Led through darkness. Led through questions. Led through a breaking point. In every step, Jesus had walked beside her, sometimes behind the veil, sometimes in full view. Her journal filled again. She opened to the last entry. Then she wrote, "I used to think miracles came with thunder, but sometimes they come in the quiet moments, in a smile from a stranger, in a verse that finally makes sense again, in the comfort of knowing I was never really alone." Elena didn't wake up one morning with everything perfect. Restoration didn't show up like a lightning bolt. It arrived like morning light, slow, steady, gentle, 1 inch at a time. The calling becomes clear. It happened during a local women's retreat. Elena had been invited as a guest, not a speaker. She still doubted whether she had anything valuable to say. But on the second day, one of the organizers pulled her aside. "I felt the Holy Spirit lead me to ask you to share your testimony tonight." Elena's first instinct was panic. But then she heard it again, the voice she thought had vanished, whisper in her spirit, "Tell them what I did in the silence." That night, Elena stood before the group. She didn't give a polished sermon. She told a raw story of grief, of doubt, of aching silence, and then of divine rescue. Women wept. They saw themselves in her silence. Her pain became permission. Her honesty broke chains. Wounds into weapons. Over the next few months, doors began to open. A podcast invited her to share. A local church asked her to lead a grief recovery group. Her DMs filled with messages. "Your story saved me. I thought I was the only one. Now I know silence doesn't mean abandonment." She didn't seek the spotlight, but God lifted her voice, not to glorify her pain, but to reveal His power. The platform she never planned. Years later, Elena would sit in front of hundreds at a conference she once could only dream of attending. Her session title, "When God Seems Silent, the Battle Behind the Stillness." She looked out at the faces, many tear-streaked, many still searching. And she began, "I once thought silence meant I was forgotten, but silence is where I found out I was fought for. I am living proof that Jesus doesn't leave. Even when He's quiet, He is moving, He is shielding, and He is writing a redemption story you'll look back on and thank Him for." Full circle moments. Elena returned to the park where the little girl had once said, "Jesus told me you'd come." It was empty this time, but she smiled. "You were right, little one," she whispered. He really was there, and He never let go. Heaven's perspective. Elena didn't get every answer, but she got something better, revelation, that every storm was filtered through mercy, that every tear was collected in heaven. that every silence was a space where heaven fought harder than hell could ever attack. A life that speaks now, when she meets people on the edge, those unraveling in quiet corners of their faith, she leans in and says, "He's closer than you think." You might not hear him now, but he's fighting in places you can't see. Don't walk away. The silence will end. And when it does, you'll be stronger than you ever thought possible. Because Elena didn't just survive the silence. She came out with fire. Final journal entry, one last page in the journal. She writes, "I used to beg for your voice. Now I thank you for your war. I am no longer afraid of silence, because I know it's never empty. It's sacred, and I am living proof that even when you said nothing, you were doing everything." She closes the journal. And this time, it's not the end of a story. It's the beginning of calling.